All right, this session, I wanted to go over the, controls, security considerations and controls. So the whole idea of this is, I just wanted to make sure that for the permission boundaries that we end up deploying into all of our environments, I just wanted to make sure that when I do make a change, say, for example, I add a new service, or for example, I decline an existing service, I just want to make sure that I'm not going to impact another application. So these permission boundaries are going to basically form a requirement for all other applications that are getting deployed into production. Basically, other applications have a dependency on the permission boundaries that we're creating today. So that means if I deploy something that has limited access or lesser controls or permissions, then I might be adversely affecting another application when it comes to deploying that application, or it could be at execution time also. Okay, so just like any other application that we have been building out, we've got a code pipeline, right? You've got your source where all your application code is. Then you've got a build process that takes your application code and then does some conversion. Then you've got self-mutate, that's part of CDK, and it's updating its own pipeline process. That's not really important. But then you've got these other processes where it deploys it and then it also runs some tests. All right, so in a normal application, you'd have your application code. Then you might want to run some unit tests, right? You want to test that your functions are operating correctly. And then what we've been doing is then we've been deploying our resources into AWS. So that means a Lambda function, an API gateway endpoint, and maybe a whole bunch of IAM application roles. And then together, they work together to provide a service. And then after all of that gets deployed, then we would run some integration tests. So we would write some test code to hit the API endpoint and just make sure it is actually running as desired. So you've got these different tests at different stages. You've got unit tests, which basically just determine the business logic is running as desired. And then you've got some integration tests, which basically just test the whole application at the very end to make sure it actually is all working together, all the different components working together well. So with the permission boundaries, to date, we haven't actually been testing anything. We put it together and, well, we've really just been praying and hoping that it works. Well, we've been testing it, we've deployed it into our local development environments, and then we've been basically deploying our solutions behind these permission boundaries or within the constraints of the permission boundaries. And if they deploy fine, then we just consider that as a pass. That is, it's not really repeatable and it makes it difficult. That means each time that you want to test new permission boundaries, then you're going to have to go back and find all of your other applications and try to deploy them and retest them and everything. So part of today's session, I just wanted to go over some of the different, security considerations and controls that I've put in place into this pipeline to help, manage the changes in permissions going forward, plus also adding some additional tests or permission tests to make sure that, hey, if we make a change, are we adversely impacting some existing, solution? All right. So the first bit, or the main bit, would be testing the permissions. So the way that this is working is there is the AWS policy simulator. Okay, so you've got the AWS policy simulator. Let's just take this one for now. So you can select the IAM role. I've selected a user in this place, in this example. Then you can select a service and you can select the actions that you want to test. Then it tells you that it's going to test this type of API command, run the simulation, and it'll tell you whether or not this command would get approved or allowed or denied based on the permissions that you've set. Now let's go back and let's choose a different one. Let's set this one. Okay, so I've selected a different role. It's got different policy document in here. I don't think it has API gateway permissions, but let's run that simulation and it says it got denied. So the idea here is when we are deploying our solution, we're going to deploy a copy of our permission boundaries into our development environment. So we'll deploy the IAM roles and policy documents into our development environment. And then we want to run the policy simulator against those deployed resources. Okay, so you could run the policy simulator like this, but it's a bit tedious to point and click and select all the different services that you want to test and select all the different actions that you want to test and then run them. So that's where this little solution, this little script, I believe it's, okay. So this little AWS-IAM-tester, it's actually a Python library. And all this is doing is providing an interface for you to write a Python application and I guess set some test cases that you want to run, set the role or the policy document that you want to test against, and then it all gets sent into the policy simulator, the IAM policy simulator here. All right. So that's the intent. So we come over here. Now we've got our CDK-boundary repository. And this is where all of the permission boundaries are being defined, all in these PY files. But what we're interested in today is just the testing. So I've got a test subdirectory and then a permission subdirectory there. And then I've just got this Python code, which is just here to help, I guess, streamline the whole process of testing using this framework, this AWS IAM tester framework. Okay, so what this does, it actually pulls data from config.yaml. Then it does a find and replace for the account, VPC ID, subnet. It also does it for the deployment role and execution role. And then at the very end, it will run the command line. See AWS IAM tester, and then I specify the location of the config no comments.yaml file. So then that will run, and then we'll just test all my permissions. Now, the config.yaml is where all of the test scenarios are actually located. So you can ignore all of these first few lines, but the most important bit is everything that falls under tests. So tests is broken into multiple different tests, and a test includes actions, expected results, resources. So actions are all the IAM actions that you want to test for. And then the resources are the resources that you want to, I guess, simulate or run these actions against, right? So let's say I've got S3 list bucket. I want to list bucket against this resource. So this is basically saying, can I list all of the objects in, I believe that's list bucket. List all the objects within that bucket. And so these parameters will be just replaced with the given account. And that's all done at deployment time. So these are just placeholders for the moment. And then these actions are tested against these resources. These resources don't actually have to exist. They're just hypothetical. And then I expect it to succeed. And if it passed that test, then it just proceeds into the next one. So the next one, create and delete bucket. I expect this to fail because this bucket name actually has a fail in it. It doesn't conform to the expected S3 naming convention. So I expect it to fail because the way that my permission boundaries were set up is it has to conform to a specific standard, which is RACQ S3, the environment, then the account number, then decision intelligence, then anything after is up to us. Okay, so then I've got another few things. So testing, can I list all the buckets in S3? And this is where you're not actually having a specific resource. You just want to list all the buckets on the account. That's where there's no resources specified. So it's a wildcard. So it's just a matter of, I guess, defining all of these different, I guess, services or IAM actions and the resources and determining whether or not I expect them to pass or fail. So this document has pretty much everything that I've could identify at the moment. So before I had S3, here I've got code deploy, I've got things for secrets manager, API gateway, Lambda, CloudFormation, everything is in here. Now this specific file, this config.yaml, I've also included a whole bunch of comments preceding each of the test cases, just to describe what the purpose of this test is. So what happens actually in the test_permissions Python file, this one gets run, this Python script reads the config.yaml file. It will actually do the find and replace for the things like the account number, VPC, subnet, and also it does a find and replace for the deployed resources. So that's going to be the deployer role, the execution role, and all of the policy documents related to that. And it'll list them all here. And once that's complete, it will basically strip all the comments and then have the two roles listed here. And then that's when you get to this last section, it will actually run the IAM tester and it'll import that config no comments.yaml file. And it'll run that. Okay, so this can only be done once the resources, which is the IAM resources, be it the roles or the policies, have been deployed into the account. So those are some of the requirements for the IAM policy simulator to actually run successfully. Okay, so that's our testing. Now I'm just going to go back over to the code pipeline and I'll show you some of the controls that have been put in place to help manage the deployment of this. Okay, so starting off, we've got our code commit repository. I believe we got it here. So CDK boundary. So that's here, that's where the code is being pulled from. Then you've got a build stage, which converts CDK code, which is policy_stack. So this thing is the CDK solution, and this is what gets translated into a CloudFormation JSON template file for CloudFormation. So that translation process is called synthesis. So that's why this is called synth. So this is just synthesizing, so converting Python code into JSON template. This one is just to update this whole pipeline. You can ignore that for this moment. Then one important bit is the security check. So this stage, if you click on it, it's a code build stage. But what this does, it actually looks at your CloudFormation template and then checks to see whether or not the solution that you're wanting to deploy now is actually seeking for any more permissions that were previously deployed. So say, for example, I previously had access to S3, but in my version 2 of my solution, I want to now add Lambda functions. So what would happen is, because I'm asking for more permissions, this step would run and would identify that I'm asking for additional permissions in this second version, and then not highlight it here. Then it would be up to someone to go through this process and basically tick. Instead of a review summary, it would be a tick box here. But in this case, there's no security changes that were identified in this run or this deployment run. So it's just saying that for this manual approval, it's been approved already because there's no additional, I guess, permissions that's been requested in this deployment. So this is just, I guess, another control in which, I guess, infrastructure could use. So when analytics are asking for new services, this whole process would kind of get, I guess, stalled or blocked, or someone would need to go in here, review the additional permissions and just approve it manually if the permissions are okay, and then it would continue on. Okay, so what's this one? This one is the change set. So this stage would create the change set. So the change set is simply a plan of activities that CloudFormation needs to undertake to implement the changes on the CloudFormation template. So let's just go back again. If our CloudFormation template originally in version 1 only allowed S3, and then in our version 2, we were asking for Lambda functions access, then the change set would probably go through the differences between version 1 and version 2 and identify, hey, they wanted to update their policy document, but we think we don't actually need to recreate a whole new policy document. We can simply just update the existing policy document on that's already been deployed. So it's just going to be an update existing policy document. So that's the plan. So that's what the idea around change set is coming up with that plan. Then this stage would be a manual approval. So it's just a stop or checkpoint for someone to go in, review the change set and just make some sort of assessment on, hey, this change is just going to require updates to existing resources. Is that going to impact anything? Or if the change requires a full rebuild and requires resources to be pulled down and then redeployed, then is that going to introduce any complications? So for example, let's say we had a deployer role and we had other solutions that were already, I guess, deployed behind that, and we had linkages to that deployer role. So if we were to push a change through and it identified that it needed to rebuild that whole deployer role, then that probably would raise some alarms because you would have existing solutions already tied to the previous deployer role. Anyway, so that's the whole idea around that, just to allow an opportunity for someone to review the plan changes and to make some sort of assessment whether or not to proceed or not proceed. Then this is, I believe this is the deployment. It won't actually tell me much information. But the last bit is the testing. So remember how I said in other solutions, we've got unit testing and we've got integration tests. Well, in this situation, we don't actually have, I guess, unit tests, but we do have kind of like integration tests, but tests which require the resources to be already deployed into an environment. It's because we're using the policy simulator. So I'm just going to call it permission tests. And so if you open it up, it just takes you to code build again, and then you can just sift through the all the logs. And near the bottom, it just tells you whether or not it passed or not. So here it's just testing a few things. It's testing whether or not the IAM tester or that AWS IAM tester is actually working, which version was loaded, and then did all the test runs actually complete successfully. So the test runs is the execution of this document, the config.yaml file, in the policy simulator, and whether or not they all succeeded, as in when it was expected to allow permissions, was that the correct expected result? And also when permissions were denied, i.e. fail, was that also the correct expected result? So that's all included within this single line. There's actually no output logs or output results in terms of how many tests and the pass rate. It's just all or nothing at the moment. Yeah, so that's how this solution is being, I guess, managed. It's got a few more checkpoints. It's got a checkpoint to identify when a solution is asking for additional permissions. So someone can go and review and just see that, hey, they're asking for Lambda functions or API gateway. It just makes it a little bit more focused in terms of the services and permissions that need to be addressed or reviewed. And then we've also got the, I guess, regression tests against the permissions to make sure that, hey, when we are building these policy documents, we're also going to write a whole bunch of test cases to make sure that, one, the policy document is allowing us access to the desired resources and service, but is also denying us access to any other services or resources that we shouldn't already have access to. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.